We recommend this product be installed by a competent gunsmith.
Modification of your firearm may nullify the warranty of the firearm's manufacturer.
No liability is expressed or implied for damage or injury which may occur from improper use or installation of this product.
You are responsible for the safe handling, legalities, and use of your firearm.
Warning: always wear safety glasses when working on firearms. Hi, and thanks for tuning in to the Apex Educational Network. I'm your host, Scott Folk. I'm going to walk you through the reassembly of the Mark IV pistol, but first I want to identify the differences between the Apex components and the factory components. You'll notice on the factory safety plate there's a white dot and a red dot that are painted. On the Apex safety plate we've lasered the word safe and have a red dot as well. These components make up the factory magazine safety. You have the block itself as well as the spring. If you decide not to put these components in, you need to install the optional Apex magazine safety delete plate. This will allow you to dry fire the gun without a magazine being present in the gun. The factory hammer is silver in color and you'll notice one sear notch at the bottom. The Apex hammer is black and has two sear notches at the bottom. The factory trigger body is curved and the Apex trigger body has a flat face to it. The only difference between the Mark IV and the Mark IV 2245 kit is the trigger body itself. You'll notice the 2245 trigger body is engraved with 2245 on the side for easy identification. The first step to getting your gun back together is putting the hammer assembly together. So first, we'll take the hammer itself, we'll take the factory strut, put it into the hole, and I'll take the little factory pin and drop it through and make sure I capture that strut. It should drop through and that pin should sit just sub-flush of the body. The first step to reassembly is putting the magazine safety and spring back on the hammer. I'll take the magazine safety, I'll put it over the hammer axle and line it up roughly. I'll take the spring and I'll go with the short tine forward and the loop up. I'll go between the hammer and the safety and I'll go all the way in until the front tine goes into the little notch on the front of the safety. And then I'll line up the hole roughly. I'll take my hammer axle and I'll go in from the top, capturing the spring and the magazine safety, trying to go all the way through until it aligns. And you'll know it's aligned when you move the safety down and you can see the spring dropping into its notch on the safety. From here, I need to grab the spring, the tine and the back end of the spring, squeeze it a little bit. I need to push the hammer axle all the way down until it sits against that safety plate with no extra space. If you choose to remove the magazine safety, you're going to want to use the Apex safety delete plate. Once you have the hammer strut in place, put the plate on top and line up the hole. Take the whole assembly, put it onto the hammer axle, and go all the way in with it. From here, we can assemble it back into the frame. Next, we'll install the trigger bar, plunger, and spring onto the Apex trigger. I'll put the plunger and spring into the hole. I'll take the trigger bar, put it up about parallel to the top of the trigger body, and I'll roll it down into position to capture that spring and plunger. That provides my trigger spring for connection and disconnect. The first thing we're going to reassemble is the bolt catch mechanism. First thing I'll do is I'll roll the frame up, and I'll put the spring back into the frame. That consists of just setting it into the notch, and I'll take my pin punch and just make sure it touches down and stays in place. Next, I'll take the bolt release. I'll put the nub in the side, I'll put through the frame so it's sticking out the way it's supposed to. Then I'll drop the front end down on top of that spring. With the internal plate in position, I'll take the thumb latch itself, I'll hook the opening over the end of the stud sticking out, and I'll put that in the boss on the frame. Now I have an articulating pair of components. With the bolt catch mechanism in place, it's out of the way of the trigger going in. You'll notice on the opposite side we have the spring that holds the trigger pin in place as well off to the side. So now I'll take the trigger body itself, and you want to make sure you hang on to it so you don't lose that spring. I'm going to go ahead and set the trigger body into the frame and slide it down until it's approximately in position. From here, I'll take my pin punch from the left and I'll put it through and try to capture the trigger body and the bolt lock mechanism and go all the way through the frame. Now I can put my pin in to capture everything. Next, I'll put in the trigger pivot pin. You'll notice this pin has a head on it and a little notch. That notch goes into the spring that holds it in place. I'm going to install it from the right side to the left, and I'll use it to push my slave pin out of the way as I press the pin in. You may need to articulate the trigger, move things around, and kind of wiggle it until the pin goes in. Sometimes you'll need to look at the frame from the opposite side with the pin held in place and put it in all the way across the bolt catch. In this case, it popped right in with no problem. If you're having trouble putting the trigger pivot pin in all the way, you may need to move the bolt lock around a little bit. So I'll put a little bit of pressure on the pin from the back, and I'll just articulate the bolt release from the top with my pin punch. And you should be able to push the pin in until it fully seats. Flip the frame over, and you can see that the pin is all the way down. Once I have the trigger pivot pin in position, I'll flip the frame over and just make sure that I'm all the way down. And you can see that the head of the pin is against the body, and we're good to go from here. On the 2245, the trigger pivot pin is non-headed pin, so it does not have a head that you would normally stick up. But you'll notice there's two rings around the end of the pin. Those go on the right side of the frame when you install it. So it's the same installation process. When you get to the other side and you get everything installed, it should just click into place and hold. And you'll notice a little click as it kind of locks into place. You should see it just sub-flush on both sides, or just right about flush, and that's a proper installation. Next, I need to install the safety plate. You'll notice the little hook at the front of the safety plate. That has to go over the sear. The sear is this little guy right here in the frame that our magazine has been holding for us. So I'll take the plate with the word safe and the red dot to the outside of the frame, and I'll slide that whole thing into the frame to capture the sear. The idea is that that hook is over the sear when it's installed. When you go to put the left side thumb safety in, you'll need to make sure the safety plate is aligned with the hole. You're gonna have to fight some sear tension to do that, but move it around until it looks like it lines up, and then put the thumb safety into the hole until it hits your finger. From there, I can relax that tension, and now it's held in place by the thumb safety. When I go to put the hammer in, I want to make sure that the hammer strut is facing down, roughly matching the back of the magazine safety. I'll take the spring and I'll fish it into the frame first and make sure it goes into that window so that we're in the right position. Then I'll make sure that the boss on the outside of the hammer axle catches into the trigger bar. From here, I can bring it all down and mostly get it into the frame. If I get stuck, I need to use my slave pin, so this is where we'll do a little bit more work. You'll notice that the hammer doesn't readily drop into position, so sometimes you have to push a little bit of tension against the sear to get the holes to line up. If it lines up, you can press the pin through, but if it doesn't, I would recommend using your slave pin, a 3/32 pin punch, as a slave pin to go in and align things. You can use that to help articulate things around while you go to push the pin all the way through. Sometimes you have to grab the hammer itself and push it down and forward as you push up on the safety from the back side. And this can be a little bit tricky because you're working against the spring force on the sear. With my slave pin all the way into the frame as far as I can go, and my thumb safety holding other parts in place, I'm going to go ahead and drop the magazine out of the frame. This will allow the sear to articulate more easily for us while we do the rest of this. So from here, I'll try to push the thumb safety in. In this case, it went right through. If it doesn't, you need to grab the hammer and maybe push it forward and down toward the trigger bar, basically this orientation, to get it to move the sear around while you seat the thumb safety down. We'll put the thumb safety down so it almost lines up with the hole. We'll push it in. We want to leave the hole in the back for the spring, this little guy right here, exposed so we can put the spring and plunger back in. Now I'll take the plunger and spring and put them back in the thumb safety hole so they're in position. Once they're there, I can begin pushing the thumb safety all the way down to capture. At this point, I can't push it far enough into the frame. I'll put my finger over the plunger and I'll turn the frame over, and I'll take a look at the hole for the hammer axle. And you'll notice, if I move the hammer around, the hole aligns and I can push the thumb safety in. I'm still holding the plunger and spring over here on the other side with my finger. As I press the safety in, I should be able to press it in far enough and the plunger and spring should pop into the frame like so. With the plunger and spring in place, you'll be able to see the safety articulating properly and clicking into the up and down positions. On the 2245 frame, you want to make sure that the spring on the magazine safety goes into the notch here on the side of the frame. So when you go to fish it into the frame, same kind of thing as the Mark IV, just make sure it's inside that section before you hook the trigger bar on and drop it all the way into the frame to continue assembly. If you've chosen not to put the magazine safety back in, you're going to want to put the safety delete plate on the side of the hammer. It's the same process to install it. Make sure the boss on the stud gets into the trigger bar itself, and then roll the whole thing into the frame. You may need to use your slave pin to get things to align to push your thumb safety in, but it is the same process. With the assembly back together, we're going to go ahead and remove the tape now because everything is held back in place by the internals. We'll take it off both sides, and then we can put the right side thumb safety and screw back on, and we can do some function check before we put the grips back onto the gun. We'll set that on top there, take my 16th inch Allen wrench, put it on top, put that screw in. Don't go crazy with the torque, just put it down, snug, touch it down, and give it a little bit more. And now we can do a thorough functions check of the frame. Before putting the grip panels on, I want to do a thorough functions check. So I put the upper assembly back on the frame. I'll put an empty magazine into the gun. I'll pull the bolt back, make sure the bolt locks. If the bolt locks back, pull the bolt back, drop the bolt down. I'll put my safety on, pull the trigger, no fire. I'll drop the magazine out, take the safety off, pull the trigger, no fire. I'll put the magazine back in with the safety off, it fires. I'll hold the bolt release, the bolt catch down, pull the bolt back, let it go, reset the trigger, and re-engage, and it fires. This is proper function. In the 2245, we removed the magazine safety, so I won't need to use a magazine to test it. But I went ahead and put the upper assembly back on. I'll rack the slide, make sure the gun is unloaded, put the safety in the on position, pull the trigger, no fire. Safety in the fire position, pull the trigger, it fires. I'll hold the trigger down, articulate the bolt, release the trigger, re-engage. This is proper function. Before I put the grips back on my 2245, I want to make sure to put my bolt release back on too. So I'll use the little hook on the back of the bolt release, the little fork there, and I'll grab onto the stud sticking out of the frame. And I'll drop that onto the boss underneath the grip panel. And then I'll stick my grip panels back on the frame and put the screws back in. Before I put the grips back on the Mark IV, I need to put the magazine ejector back in. I have the plunger and spring inside the magazine ejector. I'll put the plunger in the end of the notch. I'll put my finger over the top so I don't launch it, and I'll tension it from the bottom, pushing upward, and drop it into the frame. It should sit just sub-flush in the frame. Then I'll stick my grip panels back over the top to hold it in place, and I'll put the screws back in the grip. With your Mark IVs reassembled, you're ready to take them to the range and test them. If you have any questions or problems, contact our customer service department.